I think there's been a tremendous amount of naivety and having been a little bit an unsaid fossil insofar that I followed intergovernmental processes since 1991, being an international lawyer. I think there's far too many people far too optimistic about what can be achieved, particularly in the run-up to Copenhagen. And while I very much appreciate the intentions of a lot of those people, you know, who are still saying, oh, but we have to fight for a good Copenhagen deal. I think even today there were rumors that just two countries, I believe, I don't know even sure which they were, but there were probably two big countries in North America, that those countries have slaughtered basically all the references to indigenous rights and to, you know, the need to respect indigenous rights and ensure indigenous participation in REDD mechanisms from the entire REDD text, which is now coming out of process. If that would be the case, if these countries get their way, I mean, it's just such a typical example of how this whole process constantly seeks the lowest common denominator. And I have actually seen things going worse since 1992, because in 1992, policymaking was done by policymakers. You had governments. There were actually, especially in the run-up to 1992, you had a lot of very interesting consultative processes with indigenous peoples, with, you know, local communities. Of course, the whole thing being in Rio de Janeiro meant that it was the first time the indigenous peoples really had a strong voice in a UN environmental conference. So, you know, that meant that it was public policy that was being made. And I've seen about 10 years ago, suddenly a couple of particularly European governments started thinking, oh, but we cannot do this without business and industry. We have to involve business and industry into policy making. And they started pushing for that. And then, of course, the business and industry and the big corporations said, oh, yes, sure, absolutely. We need to participate in this process. But I mean, these corporations have lobby strategies. I mean, one of the problems you have, it's nice if they participate, but they're not democratic structures. So what they do is they just send a very clever lobbyist, you know, to these intergovernmental processes. And that lobbyist cannot influence his own company. So he comes there with a one-way agenda of, I want to influence this process, not I want to listen and see if then I can influence my own industry. So that is one fundamental mistake people are making, because other people come here and they, especially governments come here to influence their own government at home later on with the outcomes of the meeting. Lobbyists from industry don't do that. And you also see that, you know, it's been increasingly then all public policy has been adapted to corporate profits, to the need for ensuring competitiveness of the different industries. And I think the entire failure of the FCCC process, and I can already, I won't well, I could swear, I don't bet on money, but I can swear that Copenhagen is going to be a failure. I mean, it's almost certain already now there will not be any deal in Copenhagen. I mean, there might be a deal at the second COP, and then it's probably going to be a very, very bad deal, you know, if they reconvene after a couple of months. Why? Because of the business industry interest, and because of all these corporations having taken over the agendas of their own countries, and you see countries childishly promoting their own interests in what should be, you know, a common process to address a very, very big global problem. You know, the biggest problem humankind has ever sent for, and you cannot do that on the basis of business industries. You have to do that on basis of the kind of spiritual common interest and common thinking, the cultural communality thinking that is precisely typifying a lot of the indigenous people's contributions to this process, which are not just based on can I make money out of it, but which are based on the broader question of how can we conserve this world.